We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Amanda Bracht is with us. She's with the Mental Health Coop. We're talking about how mental health, counselors may be accompanying or going to in a pilot program starting with Metro PD on some of these mental health calls that oftentimes can be very problematic, can escalate, turn violent, and we're showing some video of some recent cases where officers had to tackle a very difficult situation and it ended with shots being fired, officers ultimately deciding they had no choice. And the hope is that, by being accompanied by a mental health expert with the officer, that they can work in conjunction and find other ways to maybe avoid the use of lethal force, which sometimes ultimately is the only choice the officer has.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody has a gun, obviously that elevates the risk for everybody, and officers' first duty is to protect. And so if there's a potential risk of somebody firing a gun, they're going to do what they need to do.
Yeah, let's take a call or two, and then we're going to get to another clip to show our viewers. Let's go to Ann. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. First, let me say I'm glad to see this is being instituted. It's long overdue. There's a gentleman in my neighborhood that I first encountered last summer when he was jumping in front of moving cars, approaching homes, trying to walk into houses. And when the police finally did come out, they took him to a house in the neighborhood and they left him. There's since been several other incidents in the neighborhood with him, and it's just been recently that a neighbor shot me his first and last name, and I found out that this man had a 30-year history of violent and aggravated charges, and the last 10 many mental health calls. My neighbors and I are, one, afraid that a neighbor's going to shoot him when he's out in the neighborhood roaming, and two, that he's going to harm someone with these when he's out roaming in the neighborhood unattended on these rampages, because he does try to enter homes with a door that's left unlocked.
Okay, hang your thought on that for a moment, Ann, because we've got a lot of calls and I want to get to this clip. But all right, so she's bringing up a good point. It sounds like, first of all, again, yeah, if he gets shot because he goes into a home and scares a person, well, that's on him. I'm sorry. He's got but there are people recognizing it's the problem. We want to prevent that.
Right.
So the calls have been made, and law enforcement at this point can only go so far if he's not necessarily broken a law or no one's charging him yet. So maybe if police get a call now like this and you guys respond, could it be handled differently? You get there, he's out of his head, but really, in the past, law enforcement maybe, well, what can we do? Can you do something different if one of your counselors is along?
Sure. I mean, this is a great example of a situation where I think the co-response team will be a huge asset to the community. So, if they get a call, the clinician can engage this individual, and there are limited, there's very limited situations with which we can force somebody to get help, but there are resources we can tap into, and that clinician can, if that individual has what we call a case manager, somebody who's following him in the community, can get on the phone with that case manager and say, Johnny is not doing well. He is, his neighbors are concerned. We need you to come check on him. They can talk with his physician if he's on medication, try to engage that he get in for a quicker appointment. And in the end, if he meets criteria for hospitalization, that clinician can facilitate that and make sure that occurs, as well as offer other resources if he's willing to get help. And one of the things that we have is a crisis treatment center that's a voluntary program, and we can maybe get him connected there and get him stable. One thing with mental illness and what you're describing is it's very episodic. Individuals can get on medication or get in therapy and they stabilize and they do well, and then something happens, they may get off medication, they have a stressor, and their symptoms are then exacerbated. The other thing with the co-response project is that the officers and the clinician are going to do their best when they're not on active calls to do follow-ups with people. The clinicians will be calling folks who they may have seen the previous day or the previous week to say, hey, we were out there, we just want to check on you and see how you're doing.
That's big, because officers don't have the time to do that right now.
No, that's not, the officers have enough on their plate to respond to emerging calls. So this gives another tool for the service in terms of helping individual and identifying and connecting them with treatment.
That's great. Let's go next to Charles. Charles, good morning. Hi, Charles.
Yes, when I used to watch Top Cops, the officers would say, under the law, they could not remove an adult from the premises unless there's been a violent dispute, no matter what the police will respond to. So when did the law change that just because some doctor comes from a hospital and said bring this in for observation, that the police can forcibly remove someone 18 or older from their place of habitation?
Are you familiar with what he's referencing there?
I do. So
Okay.
there's, officers can only remove somebody from a property or a situation if a crime has been committed or they feel that, there's immediate danger. A mental health clinician can, in our state, issue what's called a certificate of need. And it's under state code as a 6404. That is an emergency involuntary commitment. And so what that means is the clinician, if they're there, assesses the situation. If they believe the individual has a severe mental illness or serious emotional disturbance and poses an imminent risk to themselves or others, based on that, they can issue this legal document, and then that gives the officers have to help assist in executing it, the right to take that individual to a hospital for a second evaluation.
So could that potentially apply to the scenario that Ann brought up?
It could.
If you felt this individual was that far along, it's got to be pretty extreme, I think, to sign one of the...
Sure, because you're taking that person's rights away.
And they haven't really committed a crime at that point. They've had maybe perhaps bizarre behavior, wandering around, but they haven't committed a crime, so you're taking their freedoms away based on the fact that you recognize that they're either a real threat to themselves or others, and you want to try to prevent that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very strict, to protect that person's rights and their liberties, that we're saying you pose an immediate risk to yourselves or others based on your mental illness, and we have to, even if you're not willing, take you to a hospital where they are then seen by a psychiatrist who does a second evaluation, and that psychiatrist is determining if they feel that person meets that criteria for involuntary hospitalization. So their right to consent to treatment at that point is overridden, for lack of a better term, by that psychiatrist who says you need to come into the psychiatric hospital for your safety and the safety of others.
And is part of the equation here, if you can, when you take them there, then to get their family members, if they have any around, involved?
Absolutely. If we can, support system is key. But if the person is an adult, we can only get them involved if they give consent for us to call them. Their privacy laws exist to protect them, and so, in most cases, the individual does want their family notified where they are. And our goal the entire time when we have to do this process, because it is, we take it very seriously, because again, you're taking that person's rights away, is to continue to engage them and try to get them to understand why they need treatment. And sometimes they are like, you're right, I'm going to sign myself into the hospital because I know I need treatment. Or again, there's other options. We offer a 15-bed crisis stabilization unit that's voluntary. Sometimes somebody may start out as an involuntary case, but then we talk with them, we continue to engage, and they're like, you're right, I need treatment. I'm willing to go with you to this other program that I'm not going to be in a locked inpatient psychiatric unit, but I'm still going to get the treatment I need.
Let's take another phone call. We've got Joe on line one. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
I think it's one thing we're kind of overlooking here. When you call 911, the 911 operator has a criteria that they will ask you to try to determine what kind of call it's going to be. Sometimes they get feedback from who's doing the calling. Sometimes when they put out the call, they're prioritized on what the call is, and sometimes they don't really know till they get there. It's kind of like the first clip that you shown there. If the mother knew that I think it was a daughter, was in that condition where she was mentally ill, on drugs or whatever, if she'd have stayed out of the picture, her daughter wouldn't have got shot.
That's true.
The police was trying to calm her down and get her in a position where they could tackle her maybe and get the axe away from her or whatever. and get her some treatment. But the mother run into the situation and caused her to get shot. So I've been with police when they went on a call similar to that, and the guy, he fell down, and he got up, and they was real nice to him. They just asked him, "Do you know what day it is? Do you know who the president is?" And to see what kind of mental state he was in. But the police don't have the time or the manpower to stand around talking to somebody like that.
All right, hang tight on that, Joe. He brought up the 911 dispatch. Sure. With you guys coming on board, do you know, will 911 maybe have any other additional questions that might help clue them into whether or not this call is one that should send one of the crisis intervention teams?
Yeah, this is an excellent point. 911 is part of our process. We've been meeting. It's a multidisciplinary group, so it's not just mental health and Metro PD, but it's also 911 dispatch and their leadership is looking at the criteria, looking at the questions they ask, and the decision making from that standpoint.
So that may be evaluated to help target.
Absolutely, and we'll be meeting ongoing. To the point you made earlier, you know, we're starting this pilot and we're going to be collecting data, and we're going to be meeting and discussing what's working, what's not working, what do we need to adjust, and that involves, you know, are we missing something at the dispatch level? Are our co-response teams not getting to the calls that really end up being mental health related? So we really hope this next year, which is the pilot we've committed to a year, will give us that valuable information to tell us what we need to do to make the whole system better and what adjustments we need to make before we look at a citywide launch, because ultimately that's the goal, that this is not just
the two precincts.
Absolutely.
And you said you looked at it because the model is out of Memphis. Are there other, just give me a sense. I mean, I'm sure this is being done across the country in various municipalities, but how widespread is it? Is it still relatively new? Memphis has maybe one of the models. Will this be the second city in the state of Tennessee, as far as you know? How many cities are doing this?
No, this is something that cities across the country are doing and have been working on for years, because everybody recognizes that law enforcement is getting these calls. Whether we think that's right or not, they are getting the calls to deal with mental health crises, and that's not what many of them are initially trained to do. So many cities and even small towns around Tennessee have CIT trained officers.
But what about going out with
the co-response? I don't know of any, I'm not aware of any that are doing just like the exact same model we're doing in our state. There may be some, but I'm not aware. You know, Denver is where we got this idea from, because Denver is a city.
Co-response to me is the big step forward.
Absolutely.
That the two of them. So when you say that, Denver, did Memphis have co-response?
No.
No. So you're going to look at co-response pilots. So the co-response aspect of it is relatively cutting edge, new in this regard. Denver, Nashville, maybe a few other larger municipalities to your knowledge?
Yeah, I don't know exact ones, but I believe there are a few other large ones.
Okay, because the co-response is the big shift. I think that we've always assumed there was some training and that more of them are getting crisis intervention training, as they should be. But the co-response is the big thing.
It's the big thing. And what Denver found is, like, they started with the CIT training. So it's just the officers being the responding. And that worked, but then they said, you know, situations were getting more serious, more acute, and the officers were actually, you know, we need more. And so they did like we're doing. They piloted with having 2 clinicians that worked with certain parts of their city and with officers. And it became so successful that they now have, I believe, 30 clinicians across their city. And then their most recent addition is adding a EMT and a social worker to go out on the less acute cases, meaning there's no threat of immediate violence or a weapon, then you don't necessarily need law enforcement. So that's the latest thing they have added to their continuum to address this need.
It's awesome. All right, listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to show you video of a second scenario that led to the death of a man. It happened in May, involving Metro Police responding to a homeless individual who was really suffering from a mental illness, and how things went. Remember, the mother is the one who called to report it. She was so concerned about the situation. We'll be back with that and her take on it right after this.